So, can you see the workshop agenda slide?
We can.
Okay, good. All right. Nilesh, thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you. I'm happy to do that. I hope that any insights I have will be useful for some of you or all of you. I don't, everybody's experience is different. Everybody's needs are different. Some people work as parts of groups, which is what I do. Other people work individually. And so I'll just tell you my experience. I think in the end, what might be most useful is a discussion of what to expect at NKU, in particular from the Research Grants and Contracts Office, RGC, and from Barb Smith in the the money office, the people with the money, finance office. So when we get to the questions and answers, maybe there'll be some good questions you have about that. But I'll just briefly touch on a few points that I've, the major points that I've kind of thought about over the years. If I can get it to advance the slide. There we go. So, Nilesh said, let's just do a do's and don'ts on successful proposal writing. And I want to just point out some things I've noticed. I've been a proposer writer and a proposal reviewer for a long time. And as I get older, I'm asked to review proposals more and more, both locally here at NKU and through NASA. And I've noticed some things about proposals as a reviewer, especially, that I want to let you know that work and don't work. It's very important that when you start writing, you really understand what the proposal, the call for proposals is asking for, and that what your project is will fit within that. It really needs to be a good fit. If it's not, then this is not the program for you, right? And when you write, make sure that you make it easy for the reviewers to follow your reasoning. First of all, you should always use good grammar, good sentence construction, good spelling. You'd be amazed. But I think flow is one of the most important aspects of here, organization and flow. And I'll come back to this, the idea of using headers or bold or italics or something. You have to, take the reviewer by the hand and walk them through why your proposal is such a good fit. Make sure you know your audience, right? Is this a grant at NKU? Or is this a grant that is going to be reviewed by professionals in your field? If it's a grant at NKU, you really need to be careful not to get lost in jargony things. I've seen reviews back when I was on the benefits committee for proposals for sabbaticals, for example, that nobody could make heads or tails of. And so where do they end up? Bottom of the stack, right? And the other final thing is, if there's any way for you to get copies of successful proposals in your program, get them, read, learn from them, look at more than just the content, look at the organization, look at the phrasing. But whatever you do, don't go into undefined jargon or acronyms. If it's to professionals in your field, they have to be really common ones for you to be able to use them, like the name of a commonly used instrument or something, if it's XRD or something. Don't assume everybody reading the proposal knows everything that you know, right? You have to be a little bit more descriptive than you would think. There's a fine line that you work between thinking that you're going to be insulting your reader by explaining something too much and by leaving so much out that they can't quite follow what you're talking about. And I like to err on the side of explaining things well enough. And the reason for that is that, people, when they read something and they're reading along and they get it and they agree with it, they're like nodding to themselves. They're just going, oh yeah, I get it, yeah. They feel smart. You want your reviewer to feel smart that way. So give them a chance to have some interesting insights to what it is you're trying to do by explaining enough of the background that you have a concrete argument. One of the things I've seen that's unsuccessful is to use pretty pictures, but pointless pretty pictures, right? Here's a picture of a rock. I don't know, I'm thinking of something in geology that has nothing to do with the proposal, but it's on this great cliffside, it's really pretty trees in the background and whatnot. No. Typically in my field, you'll find pretty pictures of space things, right? And you look at it and you go, well, who needs to see a black hole right now? I mean, this is not what this proposal's about. Okay, it's a nice picture from the Hubble, but this isn't even about the Hubble, right? And I've seen technical proposals with like pictures of plastic parts and pieces and whatnot that really are unnecessary. You put a picture in, you might be thinking, I'm making my proposal longer, right? I got to meet the number of pages that they're calling for. No, you don't. Shorter proposals are appreciated, right? If they get their point across. You don't need to fill up that space. Or maybe you think, if I have a pleasing proposal to the eye, it'll be more appealing to people. But pointless pictures are things that keep a reviewer from focusing on what it is you really want them to know. As we assess a page and we see a picture, we're trying to make it fit within the narrative that is also there. And if it's not got a point, but it looks nice, it's not got a point, I think is the real message you need to get there. And the last point that I have on the don'ts here is that more is not necessarily better. If it's not needed, don't add it. You've probably had students who answered a test question, maybe a short answer question, and they answered it in one sentence, and you're like, yeah, that's it. And then they went on, and they proceeded to they try to explain something extra. Oh, and by the way, I also know this cool fact, which is actually really, really wrong. And you're left going, oh, you should have stopped while you were ahead. And I've seen proposals get downgraded because extra information was controversial or just outright incorrect was in there. So be careful if you add material that goes outside of how you present your argument. Right? You just need to get your point across and enough background for the argument to be strong. So I've got a few tips, right? And I'll just reiterate here. Make sure that you address the proposal required elements directly. If it says, I want an introduction, a science introduction or a technical introduction, and then some this and that and the other and the budget and whatnot, make sure you go through the requirements with a fine-tooth comb and they're all answered. And then help the reviewers find those sections because they've been handed what the requirements are and they're looking for those pieces and parts. So help them out. You can use the same vocabulary, technical section, right, or something like that, if that's what it is. Or you can use section headers or bold italic typeface. There's some, in NASA proposals, there's always a request that the topic be connected to one of the NASA science thrusts, which have a special name. And if I could remember the special name, I'd be able to tell you, do this thing. Here is our special thrust, and we put it in bold. Make sure that you give yourself enough time. Proposals written the night before or even the week before look like they were written the night before or the week before, right? And here's something that somebody suggested to me a long time ago, and I thought, God, what a lot of extra work. But you know what? They're absolutely right. Write and rewrite, right? That first time you write it, you kind of are going through stream of consciousness, writing down what happens. And in the process of doing that, you're actually organizing your head the way it should be. And the second time you do it, I mean, especially for key paragraphs, the second time you do it, you usually get it much, much better. So think about that. And then finally, don't be afraid to edit yourself. And this is why you need to start early enough. Leave time for doing this. And the way that it works in my house is that I ask my wife to read it out loud to me. And it works great. We're both appalled at some of the things that sneak through a quiet reading. Yeah. So awkward phrasing, you know, I can listen to her, and if she stumbles across a phrase, I know, I have to fix that. Right. So that's been a very good way. And you know, you want your readers to have a smooth experience, your reviewers, you know, as they go through it. So I do want to make a statement about collaborative efforts. This is a great way at a small school, or you know, a non-research oriented school, to have a successful program. And it is really the secret to my success. I work with other people, most of whom are at Research 1 schools. And they are thrilled to have somebody with an undergraduate focus be on the project. They still give me significant responsibilities that are appropriate to the resources at hand. For example, I do a lot of computer programming. I taught myself how to use special software, right? It was just where we could fit in. We don't have in-house mechanical shops. We don't have in-house electronic shops, right? And technicians and whatnot. So I just do other things. You know, work your connections from whatever your postdoc, your graduate school, industry, whatever. And if you can be a co-investigator on a grant with a PI that has a successful grant history, you can get your foot in the door and someday be a PI yourself. Collaborative efforts have their strengths and weaknesses, and of course the whole is greater than the sum of the parts is the big strength, and you just kind of get on a conveyor belt and go along for the ride, and a lot of different people together, some with more experience than you, can give a better product in the end. The weakness, of course, you know, remember what the French said during World War II, collaborators should be shot. They can be really frustrating sometimes. You know, you have rewards and frustrations in collaborative work. And I think one of the important things to do is for everybody to understand their responsibilities. And just recently I had a situation where we had at a space center, at Goddard Space Center, NASA Center, a researcher there did not work with his administration, the equivalent of our chairs. And when it was time to support the proposal, they said, you know what, you didn't come to us early enough for us to understand all the ins and outs of the responsibilities that you're proposing here. We're not going to support this. And that proposal, that was just this year. That proposal did not go forward. We're hoping to have another chance in a year or two. So it's important that people, including yourselves, keep their chairs up to date. Since all my work is collaborative and I continue to be asked to be part of new collaborations or proposals, it's been very nice for me. And what's, you know, over the years, I was a graduate student, I was a postdoc, I was a faculty member, and, you know, and as a faculty member, I was just a participant. A co-investigator is, you know, an institutional co-investigator, and then finally now I'm the PI of a NASA project, with an experiment on the space station, right? So that's nice. So at NKU, I think it's important that you understand allowed and disallowed expenses. For example, there's a PDF that Charmanti would have that shows what can and cannot be paid for from department budgets, and some of it overlaps into science budgets. But typically, Barb Smith is the one that is going to help you understand best what can and cannot be paid for. But you'd be amazed what you can pay for. For example, when I go to Antarctica for field deployment of our instruments on high altitude balloons, I am required to get a medical exam, and I am required to take some warm clothes. I can pay for both of those out of the grant, right? So make sure you budget for details like that if you need it. Some programs allow you to get summer salary. Always take it. Some programs allow you to have some salary replacement salary for reassigned time during the year. Make a deal with the dean, right? You don't necessarily have to provide all 25% of the reassigned time, but sometimes you can split it 50-50 with the dean, and I've even split it less, right? Paid for like 7% instead of 25%, and she's been cool with that, right? They want to support our research efforts, and they know that time is the most important resource for us, and so you'll find them working on creative ways to help us do that. One more thought about the dean and budgets. There's projects that allow overhead and projects that don't allow overhead. So overhead is that money on top of the normal expenses. And the institutional overhead is how NKU is supposed to be paying for things that support our research. In practice, I have a lab. You guys, most of you have labs or will have labs, right? So it's what NKU uses to help pay for that. And of course, Research One Schools is really obvious, the kind of things that they have. But if you have a project that does not have overhead, getting the reassigned time for it is a little bit trickier. What happens is that overhead trickles down, and a lot of it is taken off by the provost, and some is taken off by the dean, but there's money that eventually trickles down to Charmanti. And you can make a deal with the dean and Charmanti to say, we're going to waive the money that trickles down to our department if I can have that 25% reassigned time. And typically, if that amount is high enough to pay for an adjunct person, they'll give it to you. And that adjunct person, as you know, gets peanuts, right? They get $3,000 or so for a semester's class. And so that in the end, that's not very much. So that's a possibility for you to do that. There's, getting practice on internal grants, I think, is nice. You can establish a basis for further study. So as young faculty, it's good to take advantage, I always did, of your institutional grants. But the idea is that it should lead to something, right? There should be a result that, or something that you can report in a proposal to an external source. Then it's worthwhile. If it's just fooling around on something that doesn't lead someplace else, it's not contributing towards your career necessarily, in the sense, or your tenure, for example, necessarily. I mean, what we're looking for is a program. Local hints. Don't count on RG&C to write anything scientific or technical for you. They may offer to write some things. The quality of what you'll get is highly variable, mostly not really appropriate, because they do not know your style, your requirements. They are dealing with tons of different types of funding agencies. So they just have a one-size-fits-all, and you know what your field is like more than they do. And you know what you want more than they do. So I suggest you work with them to create some of the detailed text, but don't count on them to do it for you. You can get them to do a first draft, which you will have to edit considerably, or you can make a first draft and get them to edit it, and then you edit it again. Okay, so that last bullet I already went to. Make sure that you include student hire in your budgets. I think that that's one of the strengths of NKU. We have good students, and they want to be part of this usually. So I was asked to talk about research expectations for tenure, and I just tell you, these are my impressions, right? I've been here 20 years, and I was somewhere else for 10. And I've seen quite a variation. Within NKU, the different departments, you'll see a wide variety of expectations. Some places have, you have to have 3 papers and in certain journals. That'd be like the business school or something. And the sciences, they vary quite a bit. Biology has different rules and chemistry has different rules in here. And I think that you will get poorly reviewed in RPT if you don't show some sort of motion towards a research program with the measures of, applications, publications, students in labs, presentations, okay? And those grant applications, internal versus external grants, external is always better, but in terms of getting research, getting tenure rather, I've seen how internal is enough, but I think you should always show that you're trying for external funding if your field is something that gets funding. So my specific impressions of our department, okay, I think we're more lenient than most, actually. I say more lenient than some, but frankly, should say than some. I think that we're pretty easy when it comes to research, surprisingly, being a science program. And what I think is being looked for is anything that just has a year after year motion, okay? They want to see you build a snowball and then start pushing it, okay? Let it get bigger and bigger, right? And this is not a rule in stone, but I know that if you have at least one refereed publication by the time you go up for tenure, you're in good shape, okay? Now, what defines a refereed publication? It's different in the different fields. In my field, it's definitely in a journal, but I know that EGT has had successful tenure bids on conference proceedings that are refereed, right? So it varies from field to field. Also, a big variable is the chair and the dean. The dean and the chair can disagree on what's expected. And you've probably heard of times when the dean will pass on somebody's tenure that the chair put up, and that the chair will pass on somebody's tenure that the committee put up, right? So I really think it's important for you to communicate, especially with your chair, from time to time, to make sure that the chair is happy with what you're doing. There's annual performance reviews, APR, that, are around February, March. That's not enough. I think you should just have a conversation from time to time with your chair that just asks, so how do you think I'm doing? Let me tell you what I'm doing. This is what I'm thinking of doing. And I think that that'll go a long way towards finding out where you could have trouble, or if you're at least on the right track. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was, in all this, that's a lot of work, right? And so how do you keep a life-work balance, right? And I probably work far more than I really need to. It's because I like it. I'm just driven. If I wasn't driven, I would never have done the work to get a PhD. That's a lot of work, right? And I really like what I do. And if I didn't, I wouldn't have bothered getting a PhD in it, right? So we are predisposed towards spending too much time on work. And, all of us have different outside things going on. It might be family, it might be hobbies or whatever. I mean, we need to retain some sort of balance and still be able to get tenure at the same time. I remember when I was tenure track at my first school, I would come home, eat dinner with my family, put my son to bed, and at 7 o'clock I was back at the kitchen table making notes for the classes the next day, and I'd work until 11, and then the next morning I'd get up and go in and do it all over again. Weekends were spent on it too. It is tough, but it's a great reward at the end. There's no pink slips, and that's particularly nice in times like these, like COVID. We don't have to. Tenure is a big reward for a lot of work in the beginning, and so it's worth doing. Stay focused, work hard. My solution to the insanity of working so much was to stop one day a week and do something else, right? And not just cut the grass and work in the yard unless that's your thing. I had times when we would go and go hiking or something fun like that, right? So that's just my personal experience of how to deal with the insanity that is getting tenure. But that's all I wanted to say. Hope you've been able to glean something useful here. I'll stop the share and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Scott. I have to leave, so thank you, Nilesh, as well. This was really helpful, and I hope our young, tenure track and non-tenure track faculty would get benefit from the lessons learned. So, Nilesh, you are going to, make available the recording, and that would help the others who are not here. Thank you, and bye.
Yes, thank you, Said, for attending. And I'll share this after the meeting is over. Yes, thank you again, Scott, for all the, that was really great information. And these are the points that we really need to know, especially the early career faculty, as we are writing proposals. So I do have some questions, but I will let other faculty ask questions first, and then I will ask my questions in the end. So feel free to ask questions if you have any.
Thank you again. Oh, sorry, Nivanti, did I cut you
No,
off?
go ahead, Sue. Go
Okay,
ahead, Sue.
sorry.
I'll ask
Yeah,
next.
thank you so much for this presentation. I think it was really helpful. We are all, I believe, here, most of us are early career faculty, so it was very helpful. My question to you was, when you started off writing proposals or external grants, is there any kind of resources that you read, some kind of books? I know there are there are books on grant writing. I know there are resources nowadays easily available, but it's very hard to really rely on. Some of them may not be totally trustworthy. So what was your first step, in writing of
Right. Well, I'm from the dark ages, pre-internet practically. So this whole set of information about writing grants and whatnot, I think they're going to be telling you pretty much what I was just saying. Pay attention to what the program is asking for and write to it. Make sure you know your audience. I mean, these are really general ideas, big ideas. There might be another idea in there, but mostly the way that I learned to write grants was in two ways. One was looking at successful grants, and the other one was trial and error. So I used my internal grant getting to write grants and get feedback on those. I was fortunate, I had postdocs, a couple postdocs at R1 schools, and as part of that, I would help edit at least grants, right? And this is the advantage of being in a collaborative effort. I was able to see the other grants as they were being put together. I think learning by example is what I do best, and I would recommend it for everybody else. If you can at all find examples of proposals that are in the program that you're interested in, check them out.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I will go ahead. So Scott, so you were saying that it's a good idea to look at successful grants. Would you be willing to share one of yours?
Sure. They'd be very specific towards my program, and but you could see sort of the level of organization and writing, and I have good ones and bad ones, right? So, for example, I just turned in a sabbatical proposal here locally, right? And that is something that you could see how I was writing to an NKU general audience, right? And then there's proposals. I'd have to think about this because I'm not sure I'm allowed to share proposals if they're really public to NASA. But I might have. I have to think about that, whether I can share the ones to NASA, because they're not just mine, right? It's, as I said, I'm in a collaborative effort. The ones that I write to my institution are always just mine, right? So I'll see if I can find something. Let me write a note.
Okay. And so I have a second question. So when I was at my previous institution, it's similar, very similar to NKU. So one of the professors who was successful in external grants, he told that collaborating with R1 universities can be difficult. Most of the time, they would undersee our teaching colleges. But you said that you have been really successful with that. So you go with what kind of institutes do you go with in collaborating? What have you experienced?
Just real quick, bye, Delu. Thanks for joining us. She's got to leave, I see from the chat. My collaborators are the University of Michigan, the University of Chicago, Penn State University, University of Maryland, a few overseas universities in Korea have been collaborators, Italian institutions and French. Indiana University, and I am building on relationships, especially at the Midwestern universities that really started in graduate school for me. I never let go of those, and there's been tough times. I mean, when I was trying to get tenure, it was really tough to be able to get my classwork ready and still participate in a proposal, a research project. But what I did was try to find some task that I was comfortable performing and could do, right? And in the beginning, that there was a certain kind of detector that I would build. It's very simple technology, plastic scintillator, photo tubes. There's a certain amount of equipment that goes with it, and so I would use my startup and buy those pieces of equipment. It was very straightforward. I was able to get that and use student help to put those together. And as time progressed, I developed more of these computer skills and knowledge and was able to move into a different realm. The point is that I had to look for a place where I could contribute. And my collaborators, I had to be in with the right group of people, right? For them to continue to invite me meant that I had to be productive. I could not just be along for the ride, right? And they were always supportive, right? But they appreciated what I brought to it. So, I mean, it worked both ways. Yeah, so I don't know if I answered your question or not, but trying.
I think Sarah, I saw you unmuted. Do you have a question? I thought like you were going to ask a question. I think
You're still
you're
muted. Yeah, you're still muted. There you go.
Okay. No, I just had like muted and turned my video off, and then I just turned it back on. So
I had one more question, Scott.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah. Go ahead. No, I can ask it later.
I guess being a small program in geology, I guess like do you have anybody kind of help review your proposals as you kind of work on them? I know you said you read them aloud and so on, but do you maybe at this point you don't need to, but early on did you have any help kind of with the writing or reviewing or getting suggestions?
Yeah, so I have two different kinds of two people basically who help me out with that. One is professional and the other is my wife. She makes a big difference to me in terms of just being able to express things well enough. I don't expect her to help me with the technical stuff, and the technical words come along and she says, "Are you serious? Yeah, that's right. This is right, really." I mean, that's where it comes to my judgment. But my professional colleague, I will ask occasionally to look through a proposal when I'm not sure if I've done the job I think that's necessary. I say, can you find some holes in this? Honestly, the feedback from him is marginal. Sometimes it's useful. But what happens is that people are busy doing their own thing and don't take a huge amount of time to look at your work, right, necessarily. And so I find it difficult to find the right person to get good feedback from.
Yeah.
If you ever do, don't tell anybody. Keep that person for yourself.
Yeah. Don't tell anybody about them. Don't tell anybody where the morel mushrooms are, where the good fishing spot is, or who your good reviewer is.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So in the end, I think that reading a proposal aloud is a good measure of the BS factor, if you'll pardon my French. How does it sound when you read it out loud? And it's not just the wording that comes through. The whole set of ideas that you're trying to argue, when you read it aloud, it makes sense or it doesn't.
Yeah. Thank you.
Scott, thank you so much again. And sorry I was late. I was really looking forward to it. So thanks to Nilesh also for recording this. So one of the questions that I have is not necessarily grant writing, but there's a period between the time that you start working in academia as a tenure track faculty until you start getting more money. And during that time, my understanding is that you have a startup package. And so one thing that becomes, I think, extremely important is to how to allocate your startup package between different students. So for example, you can have 2 PhD students for a period of only 2-3 times of support, or you can just distribute that into a larger number of students, but maybe either masters. Or basically what I'm trying to ask you is, how do you go about, do you have any comments about how would you manage that startup package until to the time that you make it to getting external funding?
That's a good question. And I think that I'll try to say a general answer to a question that has very specific answers for different individuals. The investment you make should move you forward towards your research program that you want. That's precious money. Once it's gone, right? But it should help you lay the groundwork that you're going to build your next proposal on, I guess is what it really comes down to. If you can have a publication at the end of it, and you need the students in order to do that, then they're worth investing in. But if, like in my case, you needed a certain bit of equipment in order to make the contribution to the program, you need to buy that equipment, right? So my decision took advantage of my skills at the time, which were the equipment-oriented things. And nobody else was oriented towards that. I had a niche, right? And now I have a niche, the simulations. Right? And so what do I spend my money on now? I buy computers. I pay for students because I need them to help me do this coding. They're better at it than I am. So that's not an answer to say, do this. It's an answer to say, think about this.
Right, right. Thank you.
Zio, did you have a question earlier?
Yeah, I was just going to actually build upon these two questions that Nevanti and Saeed asked. So, I mean, we are predominantly an undergraduate institution, and how do you involve undergraduates in your external grants, and especially at the level, sometimes where we have done research at PhD level, and if you want to build upon, say for example, I consider myself a fresh graduate. I've just graduated out of PhD 2 years back. So I'm still working on my PhD proposal and building upon that. Now,
So
how do you so how do you put them to that level? Because there are certain skills that they don't learn here. They don't sometimes take calculus till their last semester. So how do you involve undergraduate students?
So that's a real challenge, right? And I've involved them in doing two different kinds of things. One's sort of mechanical oriented. For example, if you've got an electrical project going on and you need somebody to solder a bunch of stuff, you spend some time teaching them to solder, and then you sit them down and you say, I want those pieces on those boards, right? And so they learn a skill, and you go back and you just make sure they do it right. And you have to account for the fact that there's going to be some problems. One thing, I talked to Matthew Zakate about using students in research, and we both agree with this. We could do it a lot faster ourselves. The honest truth of it is,
Yes.
But it's highly valued here, and I think it's a good experience for the students. And so I make an effort to get them involved, not always successfully. I probably only have about a third of the students that I try out actually end up in my lab. Not all of them work out. They don't have a work ethic, or they end up not having the interest. I've had to go to the computer science program to borrow students from them to do projects.
Coding.
They always demand, they want money. Our physics students are happy to work for food, but computer science people, they want money. And so the two ways that, there's a mechanical or there's a computer, that's what I've got so far. And just be prepared. When you identify a task, I like getting the students when they're freshmen.
Right.
Because, the problem, you've got 4 years to train them.
Right, you can train them.
Yeah, because the problem with students is they leave, right? It's the same thing with graduate students, but at least with graduate students, you can make them stay for a while by not signing their PhD papers, right? But undergraduates, they're going to get out of there no matter what you do, pretty much, so it's good for me. It's good to get them early and let them learn something, and they become much more involved in it too.
Right. No, that's a good point. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm going to have to leave. I've got this 4 o'clock student advising appointment and another one at 4:30 as well. I just want to say thank you one more time for inviting me to speak about the research, and you know, the Regents professor. That's something that is the apex of my career, is how they put it in the application, at the apex of their career. But I've always been concerned by that. You know, the apex means that it's all downhill from here, right? It's like the summit. I've reached the top. From here, it's all downhill. I'd like to think otherwise, right? I'm not ready for that to be the case. But still, it's a thrill to be recognized in this way. And for you to invite me to speak to you is a real honor. I appreciate that. I wish you all the best of luck, and I'm quite sure that you're all up to the challenge of surviving these early years as you work on tenure, and then getting there. And I look forward to being your colleagues.